Hi, welcome to the latest episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. I'm Ray.
And I'm Chris.
And today we're going back to the 1800s and we're going to be looking at the death of Zachary Taylor. And Chris, there were only two Whig presidents in American history. And by Whig, we're talking about the political party that sort of predated the modern Republican Party. And that was William Henry Harrison, who was president for 31 days, and Zachary Taylor, who was president for about 16 months. So the Whigs, they only got two in office, and both of them didn't serve a full term.
Yeah, it's interesting. We think about presidents and looking at it today. One of the things that we just kind of expect is this 4 year term, and that these individuals are kind of going to lead the country for 4 years. They're going to have a lot of influence, a lot of impact. There's going to be a lot of changes, and they will be recorded in the annals of history as just phenomenal individuals. But yet you get some individuals that come along who basically they show up as the back of the old history textbooks where there's a picture, there is the years of service, and they kind of fall off the face as it relates to presidency. However, both of the individuals that you mentioned, they have a great history, they have a great story that does lead them to the presidency. It's just when they end up at the presidency, things kind of fall apart, and it's very short term.
Yeah, both of them were military generals. When I think of William Henry Harrison prior to his presidency, I think about the Ohio Territory, the Shawnee, Tecumseh, and his brother, the Prophet. And when you think of Zachary Taylor, of course, you're going to think about Texas and the Mexican-American War, um, and his connection there with James Polk. One thing that our listeners might find interesting, since we are talking about Zachary Taylor, when he became popular because of his association with the Mexican-American War and what he did there. And both parties, the Democrats and the Whigs, were sort of trying to recruit him. But when all that was going on, he had no real political background. The man had not only not held any political office per se, he had never even registered to vote. This is a man who hadn't voted before, but he was so popular, you got both parties, the Whigs and the Democrats, trying to get him on their ticket. I mean, that says something right there about his popularity. That you've got these two major political parties going after someone who, for all intents and purposes, has no political experience, no political record to run on, or even really to run against. It's just his performance in the war.
Well, and I think, when we were recording this episode, there's a lot of very, I guess, scary events that are going on in our nation and the world as it relates to the war that has taken place. And during those times, you can go back to Dwight D. Eisenhower, and, what America needs is strong military leadership. And I think with Taylor, if you kind of look at he enrolled in the military, I think at the age of 22, and that was like life for him. He was very successful, and he won some really big battles that many people did not think that could be won, but yet his leadership and his poise, but also the respect that his fellow soldiers had in him led him to these two victories. Especially, I think what was the Battle of Buena Vista, I think is one of the major battles that kind of the borderlands there. You got to remember that America is, or the United States is gradually shifting westward as they go, and a lot of history in that, good, bad, ugly. But yet, as they're pushing forward, he steps up and he takes this expertise. It's interesting. He was born in Virginia, moved to Kentucky. Pretty much, he'd probably be like you and me in high school. Kind of went unnoticed, and just like, hey, he's there, but is he really there? And then he just steps up and really garners the attention not just of his soldiers, not just of his unit, but also the electorate as they go to look at a candidate who will give military leadership, and that's basically what defines him.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, he's not someone, today and even back then. I mean, you had people who, when it came time for a presidential election, everybody had their eye on this person or that person. And Zachary Taylor, if you were to look at him on paper, if you were looking at his resume, he didn't fit that, and he didn't fit either political party perfectly. But both parties wanted him, and the Whigs got him. So,
Yeah, and
go
I
ahead.
go back to that, and I think there's one thing it shows once again about leadership. You have an individual who was opposed to the expansion of slavery. This was a big issue that was going on, and he was like, "I'm all against it. I don't think this is right." And yet, how did he make his living? He had the enslaved that were working for him. And so once again, you have that aspect of his life that contradicts his public persona and his private life. And you know, you know this better than a lot of people. Even George Washington, the founding fathers, struggled with that same concept as well, as far as what do we do with the enslaved and how do we do it, echoing a voice of opposition out loud to people, but yet on the inside, kind of saying, well, I kind of gotta I kind of need it for my own upbringing, my life. And so you add that into his resume, if you will, and you have to look at that when you look at resumes. You can't just go on the, oh, he was a great military commander, but the reality is, you know a lot of people didn't like him because a hypocrite, basically saying one thing and actually doing another.
Yeah, and that's what we mean when we say he didn't fit with either party. I mean, the Democrat Party, even by this time, is, I mean, the party of Andrew Jackson, and it's certainly a pro-slavery party. The Whigs are somewhat divided on it. You got your Southern Whigs and your Northern Whigs, um, but so Zachary Taylor doesn't fit neatly in either category, and that's interesting.
Well, and it
Go ahead.
sets up it sets up where we're going with his death
Yeah.
because, at the moment of that 4th of July in which he gathers together and we start to see what's about to take place, it is in the middle of that. Okay, let's find a great compromise. Let's find something that is going to unite these United States. And so all of these people are coming together. This is his moment where, he can really try to bring together people, and so on 4th of July, he's going to really try to make a statement, and yet history will record that statement as the complete opposite of what it is that he was trying to do.
Yeah. And his vice president would become president and then sign the Compromise of 1850, which included that Fugitive Slave Act, which, in the Constitution, even though the Constitution doesn't mention the word slave or slavery, there is a clause in there about basically what we would call runaway slaves, fugitive slaves. But here with the Compromise of 1850 and the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, it really ramps up that idea and forcing the North to really start by law having to return people they suspected to be runaway slaves. And even you had people coming up from the South, slave hunters coming up from the South, going in and claiming, well, this person is a runaway slave. I'm here to get them. And what are you going to do? You now had a federal law, the Fugitive Slave Act, that required, Northerners to go along with this, and it denied the accused person, in this case, the person who's alleged to be a slave, a runaway slave, it denied them due process. They couldn't get a lawyer and go to court and prove they weren't a slave or runaway slave.
Yeah, and so once again, a lot of things going on with Zachary Taylor here. He is trying to maneuver a great compromise, but also, this moment in July 4th is to celebrate the um, installation or the commemoration. I can't remember the dedication, I think is the right word, of the Washington Monument.
Yep.
So, once again, people might be thinking, Washington Monument, know it, very familiar with it. Yeah, all about that. But they might not know that Zachary Taylor had a part in that. And I think we've done a podcast a while back that talks about the Washington Monument and talks about Zachary Taylor, and we hinted at kind of what happens, at this. Um, Dedication of the Washington Monument on July the 4th. So, a lot of things going on in the life of Zachary Taylor that many people don't know about him, but they know about the results of kind of while he was in leadership.
So it's July 4, 1850. He's there at the Washington Monument. It's unfinished at this point. Again, go back to our episode on the Washington Monument and you can learn about it took a long time to get that thing finished. Um, but he's there. There's a fireworks display. And, what do you do on the 4th of July? You watch fireworks. And today, of course, people eat hamburgers and hot dogs and things like that. But he's out there on July 4 that evening, drinking some ice water, eating some fruit, including, I think, some cherries, some milk. And that just does not appeal to me. That upsets my stomach just thinking about it.
Well, I mean, I love some good old Breyers. Maybe they'll come and be a sponsor for us. But the Breyers ice cream, the cherry vanilla ice cream is just absolutely just great. It just has a great taste to it. And I think with him, yes, he had the water, but he also had those ripe cherries, and he had some cold milk, but today is probably a little different
Yeah.
than cold was in 1850. But yeah, so I love the way that the documents demonstrate. It says that he gorged himself on cherries and milk, and so it wasn't that he had just one bowl of cherries, but that he gorged himself. So he had had a long day. He must have been tired, must have enjoyed the fireworks, and sometimes maybe he was stress eating. That happens a lot. He's stress eating and just cherry after cherry after cherry and milk, milk,
Oh,
milk, milk, milk. But I think anybody who's drank a lot of milk in one setting can tell you that it does not do the body good.
no, not if you're eating or drinking it too fast and that too much of it, that kind of thing. But I think one of the contexts we have to bring to what he's doing there is the sanitation in Washington, D.C. at the time. It's not good. There's no modern sanitation system. The water that's, it's not necessarily clean water. It's being polluted by a variety of different things. So it wasn't uncommon to see people get sick and even succumb to their sickness after drinking water or eating something washed in that water, that kind of thing in DC because it was not clean. And Chris, that's one of the things today that I think we take for granted is you turn on the faucet and you drink the water. Not where I live. Where I live, the water tastes like something out of a swimming pool. But if you can drink the water where you are, you don't worry about it. But at this particular point in time, in a place like DC, clean water was not guaranteed. And I'm sure Zachary Taylor probably didn't give it much thought, but he's sitting there drinking the water, the milk, eating fruit, cherries, whatever. And apparently some of it was not clean. It was not infected. It's not the right word. It was polluted, maybe with um, human feces and stuff like that.
Yeah, you got a lot of things going. You've got milk that, if not properly, stored and properly created, can cause problems. You've got, cherries that are ripe, but and then you got the water. So,
Yeah.
this is just a huge setup, and also the fact of gorging. I mean, can I just say that if water tastes like feces, I don't think I'm going to really gorge myself on that, but. You know,
I would assume it did not taste like that.
Yeah, and you start thinking, but then you have the milk, which is, I was always told you smell the milk before you pour it,
Yeah.
and um, but
Did they
anyway,
pasteurize milk back then? Had they already come up with the pasteurizing process?
I guess we'd have to
Maybe
ask Louis
not.
Pasteur. Thanks to my science teachers back in high school, I just know Louis Pasteur and come up with pasteurization, which is a phenomenal thing.
Yeah.
But I just know that by being willing to pasteurize milk, it makes it utterly good. So, but we probably need to move on from the
Oh
topic
my
of
gosh.
science and go back to because what do my jokes do? Probably the same thing that the milk did to Zachary Taylor. Ultimately kills you. So
So after gorging himself at the 4th of July celebration, I guess he had a good time, good for him. He starts feeling unwell, and there's a local restaurant, I won't say the name of it, but every time I go there, and it doesn't matter what I order, I get sick. And it's a popular restaurant. So, there's people wanting to go there, but every time I go there, I walk away either immediately or soon thereafter feeling unwell. But
and just a note to our sponsors, this is being recorded in the state of California, so we're very
yeah,
thankful for
yeah.
that today.
But I'm not saying any names. So, we all have experienced that where you eat some food and you just walk away and whatever reason it just didn't settle right. So I'm sure at least initially he probably didn't think much about it. But things get serious pretty quick. He goes downhill pretty fast because he it's the evening of July 4, and he unfortunately is dead by 11 o'clock on July 9, 11 o'clock at evening on July 9. So things go downhill pretty quickly. And the diagnosis, such that it was an infection of the bowels, what they called, and Chris, I might mess this up, cholera morbus, which I guess is a bacteria that can get into the bowels and cause you to become very, very ill. And at the time, it was fatal if it didn't calm down or whatever on its own.
Yeah, and once again, the medical treatments and diagnoses and things of that are not available like they are today, and so it suffers extremely difficult. And as you mentioned, it's very, I think you said the fourth and then the ninth, and all of a sudden, here is this man who is gone. And what I find interesting is that when he dies, that they immediately turn to William Henry Harrison's funeral and say, okay, well, that's the type of funeral that we need to provide for Zachary Taylor, and that it's held in the East Room of the White House. Basically, they do the same exact thing that they do to as they did to William Henry Harrison, and I found it interesting in just kind of reading that they then did the parade, and as they did the parade, and behind the hearse or behind the coffin or whatever is, they had Taylor's old horse that
Mhm.
he had used in the battles. I think his name was Old Whitey, and what captured the attention of everybody is that it was riderless, of course, and that they took his boots and they turned his boots upside down as it went through, and that image just recreated a lot of memories, even though it was a short-lived presidency per se. You still see the impact that he had had that got him to the presidency. And just a very somber occasion because, of course, we had just had July 4th. We had just had celebrations. You had the groundbreaking of the Washington Monument. You were trying to figure out a way with the Great Compromise. So, and then you lose a presidency. And it's what, just 10 years later that the nation turns into
Yep.
war.
Yep. And by the way, if you want to know more about Zachary Taylor's funeral and the funeral of other presidents, there's a great book. I used it in part preparing for this episode. It's called Mourning the Presidents: Loss and Legacy in American Culture by Lindsay Chervinsky and Matthew Costello. It's a really good book if you want to know more about how the nation has mourned various presidents, including Zachary Taylor. And of course, they don't deal with every president. They start with George Washington, and I think the last president they they look at, I think it's Ronald Reagan. I could be wrong with that, but I think it's Ronald Reagan or Gerald Ford, one of those two. But just looking at how the nation responds to the death of a sitting or former president. And you talk about, the horse and everything. When they held his funeral on July 13th, over 100,000 people showed up in DC to mourn the loss of this man who had only been president for, like you said, a little over a year at this particular point. And I really like his final words, Chris, because it's almost stoic in the way he approaches, and I guess in a way he approaches death, and I guess maybe being a soldier, having seen death the way he had, and of course, in their society, they were more intimately aware of death than we are. We tend to tuck death away in hospitals and hospice houses and nursing homes, and you know, they death was more of a daily thing in their lives where they saw it far more often than we do. And it's July 9. His doctor has given him a pretty bad prognosis at this particular point. And his last words are, and I'm just going to quote this quote, "I have always done my duty. I am ready to die. My only regret is for the friends I leave behind me," end quote. So,
Mm.
as far as he is concerned, he has done his thing. He's done what he was supposed to do. He did the best he could, and he's I'm sure he's not thrilled with the prospect, but he is comfortable moving on, so to speak. And Chris, but that particular time he would have been considered old at 65. But today I don't think many people over the age of 20 consider 65 old.
No, not, as technology has increased and other things have gone, but, it is powerful that at the end of his life, he was still focusing on the others of his life. And I think that just does add another remarkable quality to the presidents who have served our country, both, at the very, very beginning in times of famous events, but also just in the life of Zachary Taylor, who many people are not familiar with as a president. It just goes to show that at the end of the day, he had his duty, honor, and love, first for his country, for his family, and ultimately for every citizen of the United States.
Yeah. And and his story doesn't end there. And this is where I think my idea for this episode came about. And this is one of the reasons I've always found Zachary Taylor so interesting is I remember when I was in high school, it was during the summer. Um, there had been some controversy after Taylor's death. There was the official explanation, he died of a stomach infection. But there were other people who weren't so sure. I mean, you mentioned just a second ago, 10 years, within 10 years, the nation's going to be at war. And so there were those who suspected that he may have been poisoned, specifically arsenic. So there was a variety of people um, that wanted to exhume Zachary Taylor's body. The key figure was a historian by the name of Clara Rising and a writer by the name of Samuel Crane. And Samuel Crane had been researching Taylor's death for a long time. And he, for his part, argued that the Zachary Taylor symptoms did not match what the official diagnosis or cause of death was. So they come together, they contact the descendants of Zachary Taylor, his living relatives. Of course, none of them knew him. They're all just, descendants down through the years. So they contact them, they give the approval. Um, Clara Rising, of course, is involved in this. Officials from the Jefferson County Coroner's Office and scientists at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory all get involved in this, and they come together. And on June 17, 1991, they exhumed the remains of Zachary Taylor. Now, Chris, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he was not buried. He was placed in a mausoleum. I believe that that is the case. So they take him out of there and they test him or his remains to see what he died of. You know, was there arsenic in his system, et cetera. And what they found out doing the test on him was that he did have some arsenic in his system, but not enough, even after all those years of decomposition and everything, to have caused his death. And I guess you could say the autopsy in 1991 on his remains came back basically the same as what the doctor and everybody has said in 1850. And that is a gastrointestinal issue, likely caused his death. There was not enough arsenic in his system to have caused his death. So that I guess is a good thing. And Chris, this maybe should have been a Halloween episode because I've got now on my computer here, and our listeners can't see it, but you could go on Google and Google Zachary Taylor's skull, and you could see a picture of his skull that they took during the exhumation and autopsy. And he had good teeth. He had good teeth.
Which is a great thing about history is that it's always something new that you can learn. And and I think we talk all the time about history you didn't know but should, and there is still a little sliver of possibility that
Hmm.
maybe it didn't all turn out like it should have turned out. And it allows historians to keep researching. It allows, people to keep guessing and to think about it. And so, you know, you can also maybe ask yourself, man, he might not have had the best doctor, but he sure did have a good dentist.
He had a great dentist because his teeth, I mean, obviously there's really nothing on the skull. It's just a skull. Looks like something out of a movie. It's not, but it's just a skull. But he's got these teeth. It looks like, I mean, I'm not a dentist or anything, but it looks like he's got all his teeth, which, in 1850, that's a good thing. So he had
Yeah.
plenty of things to eat the cherries and fruit with.
And just another reminder to our listeners, just, that we love talking about these stories, and it's really great hearing about the history you didn't know but should. But also, when people start thinking about the ones who do this podcast, and immediately they will leave this podcast thinking, so wait a second. So Ray has a picture of an old president's skull as a screensaver on his computer,
Not a screensaver, it's just on the in a
just
file.
there in a file. Okay. And I have a picture of beautiful mountains and a lovely stream. Yeah, that's what makes this podcast so great.
It is. It is. It's for some reason that kind of stuff just fascinates me. So I don't know.
Yeah.
So
Listeners can go back to a previous episode in which we talked about your visits and your long walks in
yeah,
graveyards, and they'll
yeah,
understand who's the one that came up with this episode.
yeah. This was my idea. Um, so I take full credit or blame for it. Anyway, Chris, thanks for another great episode of History You Didn't Know But Should. Hope our listeners enjoyed this episode. If you did enjoy this episode, please share it with your family and friends. Give us a like on YouTube, give us a like on Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Until next time, I'm Ray,
I'm Chris.
and we'll talk to you later.